It's showtime, everybody. We're gonna have our grand finale. We're gonna build a party. Um, we're also gonna build a temple um, or a house for the name of the Lord my God, according to the first sentence of the chapter. And I was thinking, we've been dabbling into the high realms, right? We're dabbling into the universals, and I was like, but what's happening in Genesis, right? In the symbolism, it's going down to the level of man, right? Like it's introducing man as the image of God, um, and we're going to talk about building the temple, right? And so, as the image of God, um, man has a role. Like he has to do something, right? He has to build something, and that includes or centers around building the temple. And so the question is kind of like, okay, like what is our role exactly, right? Like how do we look at it? Because well, we'll get into it, but the theme that stood out to me when reading today was that it's all uh, trying to center things around man, right? Like man is in the center, like things revolve around man, things are in relationship to man, right? And in some way that has to all be honoring God. It has to be in right relationship with under God. Um, and and so it's kind of like finding our place. Um, and yeah, I'm kind of want to look forward to that. Uh, Also, we'll only have one book chapter, and then we have a social commentary chapters coming up. So um, in in the social commentary thing, I think that also centers around our role as man, right? Like like how are we to look at creation, right? Like how are we to look at our place, um, and not exceed it, but see things in their proper context. Because well, yeah, we can dive into the problems with people contextualizing because Twitter is full of those things. But but yeah, like the thing that's standing out to me more and more, especially after this book as well, right? It's like the book is in a large sense descriptive, um, and it's like, yeah, but you got to make the positive case, right? You got to say, okay, this is the thing that we're building. This is our temple, right? And this is your contribution. And if you can't make the positive case, like I don't think the descriptive case is gonna matter much. So because it, yeah, like descriptions don't tell you what to do. So I'm gonna slide it over to Christopher. Are you cut out to do this?
Yeah, that's what I put here. Thinking along with everything you said there. Yeah, thinking about the cut stones, and you've got the two types that are mentioned in the chapter here are the basically the foundation stones and the ornamental stones. And thinking about this fractally, there's like some sense where by being man centered, you're figuring out which stones to place where, and then some other sense like you are one of the stones being placed somewhere. And so there's that whole set of, multi agent and arena relationships that we can look at, but hopefully not pay too much attention to, and see if we're actually building something or making a mess, or whatever else you might have come up. Slide down to castle.
Yeah. So this is our last one. Of course, just so happens to be the exact 40th session that we've done. We have spent 40 days over the course of 10 months in the wilderness on this book club, finally coming to an end here. We're reaching the sort of completion of it as well. We're also seeing the completion of the building of the temple. So a lot of the stuff that I'm going to be kind of thinking about this last session is the aspect of the establishing space, but then also completing the space. And then the fact that just because you have established and completed it doesn't necessarily mean that now you can do absolutely nothing. That doesn't mean that that entropy no longer exists, or that maintenance isn't a responsibility that's now kind of inherent in having established something. So it's a very interesting thing of having okay, you've completed the project, but then also now you have everything that comes after that. There's a lot of implications because this is Solomon. The name Solomon comes from shalom, which means peace, but also completeness. And so you have we'll as we'll kind of see his relationships between the king from the south, the king from the north and the queen from the south. How you see a lot of the masculine and feminine kind of playing into there, and this bit about the central mediator not necessarily being masculine in relation to everybody else. And so there's a lot of really interesting stuff going on there. But then also that important aspect of time, that just because you have done the thing and a certain thing has been completed doesn't necessarily mean, especially when you're dealing with time, the fact that you have included time for a time does not mean that you've included time for all time. So we'll see that play out here in a bit. Gustavs, will you please?
Sure. Good evening, everyone. It's been a really interesting, fruitful time in this book club, and it's a big deal for me is to figure out the relevance of all the patterns being thrown at me. Like that's the biggest challenge, and perhaps the biggest pattern is just being in the book club, and so we have to squarify life for things to work, and that means like being regular and consistent and so on. So struggling with that, working through that, seeing stuff. Squarification. I did some gardening today, and I did a bunch of squarification of land that had been square at some point and had overgrown, and so it needed to be rectified. So thinking about that. Who's left? Is Mark left?
Yes, I am left. Yeah, I mean it's the symbolism happens moment of episode 40, and totally unplanned and not really sort of noticed, we'll say, at least not by me. And the way in which this chapter comes together to, we'll say, top off the idea of order from the beginning. So you start out with the beginning and some, we'll say, number of objects or number of things, however you want to sort of frame that. So it's always clumsy. And then you move into, we'll say, proper relation of those things. And, to Castle's excellent point, just because you now have the proper relation and you refine them and you put everything in the order, now the work begins, right? It's just the nature of the work changes. You're no longer in building mode. You're now in maintaining mode. And that doesn't mean you won't go back into building mode someday, right? That's the time for all time thing, I think, Castle. But you have to, again, understand all of this. I hate to go back to it. It seems obvious, but I think people miss it. Cosmic symbolism in Genesis, right? And it is a commentary, right? Now, we can argue about what we think the purpose of the commentary is. However, this commentary certainly, I would say inarguably, if I were that provocative, provides you with a new appreciation for how to put the pieces, or maybe order the pieces that you find in Genesis in that way, using the components, you know, that he's outlining, i.e. the quotations, and the pictures, right? And the fact that it's the pictures is the thing that allows you to do that. In other words, the words are of no utility here other than as anchors to point to how to do the ordering, which I would argue is fundamentally poetic. You see my tweet from earlier today, which wasn't in the forefront of my mind, and I hadn't actually read the chapter yet. So I don't know how these things happen, but they happen. So that's good to know. And then the sort of integration of the higher level order at the layer of the society, maybe, is probably the best way to think, or maybe the culture. That's what this is. And I think once you see the book as, here's how this ordering principle or these sets of ordering principles work at this layer, here's how these same sets, same pictures of ordering principles work at this layer. Here's how they're the same ordering principles. And in some cases, in most cases, they're the same components, but they don't order the same way based on where they are in the hierarchy. So the hierarchy is in a sense invisible, and in a sense the most visible thing at the same time, right? And it should not be made explicit, and it doesn't need to. Like, it's explicit in implementation. It does not need to be made explicit in, we'll say, critique or analysis or whatever kind of term you want to use, which is why all but one of the Catholics I've talked to about this book said, yeah, I read the pictures, made a lot of sense, skip the words. Right? Because they have those tools, and so the pictures sort of inherently make sense. And that's great for Catholics, and they're kind of bored, and whatever. We kind of get this in in our early Sunday school, but by the time we're catechized or whatever. But it doesn't help everybody who didn't get that formation when they were young. And so having this as a way to get the formation that maybe you should have gotten when you were young, after the fact, is very, people find it very useful. And I want to emphasize that the text, because again, is this a book really? The text is very helpful for showing people the connection between the pictures and the words. In particular, we'll call them the poetic prose in the Bible. All right. And that's what gives this book its flavor. But the work that is done by this, because it's just Genesis, right? It's still presuming that you're reading, we'll say, the rest of the text that it's commenting on. The work here has just begun. And maybe the implication is you now have all the tools to do that work, because the tools were shown to you in the book. I'm not sure that that's necessarily true, but it's a good start. And so reflecting on that and taking that seriously, and not, we'll say, critiquing, questioning, analyzing the author or his approach, but actually just kind of taking his word for it and seeing how well it goes, is probably the best way to engage with the text, despite whatever nitpicks or sort of he's still using the word meta. It still grates on my nerves every time I read it, right? But that's a ridiculous nitpick at some level. And so being able to engage with this and sort of realizing the fullness of not just the commentary, because also the commentary And I think that's why there's the transcending scientific worldview, last part here. But the fullness of the symbolism, maybe it's not the fullness of all the symbolism in Genesis, but the fullness of the symbolism in Genesis that's being commented on, I think is important, and also acquiescing to that fullness. Like if you're rejecting it or saying it's not complete or whatever, you're not going to get out of the text what you can get out of the text. And so, you've agreed to pick up the text. So let's just keep going with that. And I think that is actually sort of exemplified here in the final chapter. So that is what I want to highlight, and hopefully we'll continue to do so as we finish up today. I'm super excited and also sad.
So there's a lot of text in this chapter, and just as Mark, I had this this insight before I started reading the chapter, and my mind went back to grace, and I was like, living in the state of grace is like being the tree, right? So like you're kind of like standing in the place of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, right? You're embodying that on the level of well, whatever level you're on, right? Like Solomon is doing that on the level of the nation, but Noah was doing it on the level of his family, right? So what that also means is that like the staticness from the tree, right? Because it's like kind of like stagnant in time in some sense, is replaced by something that's alive, right? So we're talking about building, putting stones down, right? Dealing with the overgrowing nature of things, right? All of these things are being alive, right? They're in a sense they're in interaction as opposed to a static image, right? And I think that's when we go from the level of whatever the garden is to the level of man. That's the distinction, right? Like we're in this interactive quality, and we're having to account for things, right? So we don't. There's a mentioning of the naming, right, and that Adam was supposed to name effectively the things above, right? And when you have to name the things below, you get a different responsibility, right? Like it's like working the land, and so let's oh, that's the wrong button. So if we go to the text here, right, like it starts here, I want to build a house, right? And I'm looking back at the text and what have we been talking about before this, an ark, right? So the ark is also housing God, right? But the ark is a transitory vessel, right? And a house isn't a transitory vessel; it's a destination, right? And we were talking about having built the house. So I'm just stating there's a going to the building. Maybe that's like the 40 days in the wilderness that Gassel is pointing at, right? And then there's the establishment or the building of the house, and then there's the living in the house, right? And they're all different phases. But I think that's specific to the level of man, right? Like where like it's in the trajectory that's on our level, that we have to transition to a place, then establish us at the place, and then live our lives there. The second thing is that it's for the name, right? So it's like like it's I guess it's like giving body to the name. Like I don't know how better to say that than that. So it's housing the name, right? Like literally. Yeah, that's kind of what I had to say about this page. Like we're going to go over the specifics on the next page anyway. So
Well, I think I would just say, I mean, he points out that we're just seeing a lot of the same symbolism that we've already seen, and so we do see it all kind of not necessarily mashed together, but you're seeing, the feminine in the south, the more earthly, generally considered subterranean in terms of like a sort of flat geographical perspective, and then you have the sort of heavenly king that we're going to wind up discussing why he's so on the following page. A lot of these things about the vine being connected to time and the fig tree being connected to space, these sorts of things. So we are just kind of seeing a lot of the same basic elements that we saw before being kind of laid out very nicely, especially because he's been talking throughout the commentary about establishing space, these things being placed, in the center or on the periphery or what have you. And we're actually seeing that happen in the story of Solomon building the temple in cooperation with these other people around. And there's some very interesting things related to the fig tree and the temple. I don't know necessarily how far I should go into that, but I think I'll just point out that the whole thing of, as we're kind of maybe getting into this next page here shortly, the thing about the leaves of the fig tree being related to the girdles in the garden, and this thing of like dressing and the shade being connected to the pillar of space, and then just kind of a very brief mention that in Mark 11, the story of the fig tree not having fruit is placed, and then you have the cleansing of the temple, right, which was the temple that replaced the temple that we're reading about right now, and then you have the tree dwindling, so it like sandwiches that story. It's not one after, it's like the tree is cursed, cleansing of the temple, and then tree is completely undressed in the last one. So just for the folks at home, to Mark's point, that as we're kind of going through the symbolism, you have an opportunity to do optional homework basically in perpetuity after this.
yeah, the thing I want to point to is that it's his victory and his vine, right? So they're personalized.
Right, and he's establishing in here the greatness of King Solomon, right? And so that's kind of your established baseline. But that changes the frame. So the frame before this was all time and space and all these big things that everything's encapsulated, and all the animals, all the people, right? Now the frame, the highest thing, is King Solomon, right? And the thing below that are his people, roughly speaking, right? And then that's establishing a relationship between the other peoples and the other kingdoms or empires, whatever you want to call them. And then he's encapsulating everything and then drawing it: Judah, earth; Israel, heaven. Right? He's just saying vine, time, tree, space. Right? To bring this sort of high on the horse symbolism that he's engaged with in earlier images and chapters, down into the human level, right? The human societal level. And the reason why there's so much text is because he's doing that in text with propositions, right? Because he knows his audience. This text is written for an audience, for a specific audience. If you don't know what that audience is, it's probably you. Good. Just go with it. So yeah, and yeah, that does continue, on the next page. And then he just starts, using we'll say advanced symbols as a result, right? Because he's already laid the groundwork earlier earlier on in previous chapters.
So I don't know why I never caught this, right? But like, if you put on a girdle of leaves around you, what are you doing? You're imitating a tree. So like they're literally taking over the place of the tree when they're dressing themselves. So yeah, interesting tree categories like wisdom, right, relating to the top, understanding is relating to the bottom, right, and the largest of heart is like I guess trait openness in some sense, right? So it's the ability to interact or something with things.
I think I'll also point out that David wanted to build a temple, but God told him, "No, you're not allowed to build the temple," because he was too much of a man of war.
Mhm.
And so Solomon building the temple here, his work and his peace and ability to build the temple comes from David's the things that David set up in his previous reign. So
Mhm.
Hmm.
For David to build it, it would be like building a temple at night or something like that, because he's kind of the time guy.
mhm.
Like the lunar guy, whereas Solomon is a little more like solar in the daytime, all sight.
Yeah, I was making the connection with wandering in the desert, right? Like when you're at war, you're like kind of wandering, right? Like your purpose is a little bit screwed up because like you're not you're busy surviving, right? Like you're regressed to a more animalistic state.
Something I want to point out about this, about the largeness of heart, just like this increased capacity that he has, as we're about to kind of see. There's also an implication here from the first page, but especially we've talked in the past about like that, Adam didn't name the fish, and like this is where this is happening, where Solomon has the extended sight that we saw in that previous chapter, where they'd actually had like the eyeball like kind of looking down under the water. Now he's not necessarily speaking of every single thing under flooded land, as he says in this bottom paragraph. It says some knowledge. Doesn't necessarily mean he has access to every sort of thing, but I also want to contrast the some knowledge of flooded land with the fact that he's building the temple for the name of God. So there's also, with the naming thing, it's like, well, Adam was naming across to Eve, and then he was naming down to the animals, but he didn't go that far down. And now you have this kind of, okay, now we've got the extra layers above. He's not necessarily housing the entirety of God, right? And he's also not integrating the entirety of everything that's below, but it's an extension upwards and downwards.
So I can do the Dutch analogy here, right? So when we do polderen, right, we have this area like sea, right, and we make it into land, and that can only happen if you have a functioning civilization, right? If you don't have a civilization that's able to support that effort, like you can't do that, right? So like that only becomes available after you've attained a certain stage of civilization.
That just reminds me of that huge aquarium I volunteered at, where it's just like the amount of effort you needed constantly to maintain that place, and to maintain the fact that like they even mimicked like Atlantic currents in some of the parts of the facility, and it's just like, yeah, everything about this is artificial and is incredibly delicate. Like you have to be so sophisticated to get any of this running, and it could all go bad really quick.
So I wanted to point a bunch of things out, right? So the hyssop, right, represents the renewal, the space at the margins, right? Like it's like controlled nature, right? Because like you can remove it from the walls, right? Like so having it on the walls is something that you allow it to be there, right? And it has this mediative, decorative quality, right? So this it's like allowed nature or something, right? Like this is the nature that we allow, but it's still outside, right? Because it's on the walls. All right, and so this he's also talking about using it to clean or cleanse spaces, right? So that's also having nature under the dominion of man, right? Do act out a role of renewal. So
It's interesting as well that because hyssop is purple, but you have this thing, and then you have the crimson thread or crimson worm, which he casually just throws in there. But you have these two sort of images almost of time. You have this kind of almost wildflower looking plant. And these things are supposed to kind of undo the excessive tsarath, time infection or infiltration or what have you of a space or somebody's clothes or their skin or something like that. Just kind of, I'm drawing from, there's the one Psalm of David where he says, "Purge me with hyssop, and I'll be white as snow." And so you have this sort of like double negative almost, or like, double time thing that's happening there for renewal.
Maybe it's a double thing, but also maybe because if you have to use the hyssop, that means that you went to some place where it was growing and you plucked it, so you removed it. So if you go up to a wall and you remove the hyssop, then you can use it to kind of to cleanse the thing, right? So you're removing it from the wall, which is cleaning the wall, and then that's like a spiritual practice that will somehow reflect in the ritual that follows. And I think you're supposed to burn it actually, which also makes sense. That you're like removing this marginal thingy that got too much.
Well, you can look at it the other way as well, right? Because you're bringing it inside as well, right? So you're actually mediating the outside into the inside. You're bringing in nature. And I like this idea about the colors, right? Because like what's red and purple, right? Like these are like signifying colors, right? Like they draw your attention, right? So they're introducing of something, right? Like either something royal, right? Something majestic, or they're introducing harm, danger, right? Like so there's a signaling role there.
There's something interesting about purple too, that you get the flip sides of royal, but also penitential. Like a lot of times it's used in both of those sort of contexts. And I think sometimes there is an aspect, I think, of sacrifice in the royal, as well as kind of like the penitential and the lowliness.
Yeah, I'm just thinking, right? Like when you don't get the breath, like you kind of turn purple, right? It's like, and I think it's in there as well, right? Like the queen goes out of breath, and I was like, okay, but what's her source of breath if she runs out of breath, right? Like then she needs to be sustained from somewhere else, right? So there's something. Yeah, so I was rethinking about Adam naming the animals, right? So if you look at naming the animals in naming the snake as or the serpent as a creepy crawly thing, right? So then the naming would be like categorizing them, right? And the way that I think about categorizing is danger, useful, right? Like all of these categories that you don't identify, right? You don't see the identity of something, but you see their role in relationship to you, right? And so I'm kind of like looking at what is man's role, right? As like, well, first you have to discern what something's relationship is to you, right? And then you can find out the identity in participation, right? And so if you don't properly categorize things, especially things as redundant, right? Like you run into combinatorial explosion, right? Because like now you need to identify everything around you, right? This is, I think, one of the problem with the trans thing is like you're cognitively overloading everybody because everybody needs to attend to every detail, and that's frustrating interaction, right? And you can also do the opposite, right? Where you're just categorizing too much, and you're losing sight of the identity that's in the category, right? And I think that's the fear the opposite way around. Is like, no, we'll just become statistics, right? Like you're not going to care for us because well, we don't feel like we have a place, right? As like, well, do you accept the category, right, that you're placed in, right, or that's put upon you, or maybe better yet, that you're born into in some sense, right? Like, you're just, that's your station. I was thinking about naming your child, right? And oh yeah, I was having a text come up and it said, well, a name is just something that your parents give you. And I was like, no. Something goes wrong here, right? Like, a name is like a prophecy, right? It's like, okay, we look at you in this manner, right? Like, this is the world that you're going to be born into, right? Like, this is going to be you. That's the name, right? Like, this is what you're going to be known by. And if you reject your name, like, you also enter domicile, right? Because, like, where are you going to get your name from if you're not going to get it from your parents? And and the other side is, right, like, parents are no longer instilling people's name in them, right? Because they're thinking it's not their role. Like, it's like, no, they have to figure it out for themselves, right? So they're not even trying anymore. Like the whole and then if you extend it out of it, right? Like, if 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 the teacher sees something in you, right, and he's trying to draw that out, and, like, if you're not used to being named, like, that teacher is is not going to find fertile ground, like he can't. And so, I think the speaking of fish is kind of like, giving the things that don't have a place, because now you have a bigger thing, right? And so now you can have things enter your kingdom effectively. Okay, Castle, your last two footnotes, man. Like, you got...
I actually don't need this one, but I will be calling out the
Okay,
last one.
good.
Yeah.
Yeah. I also see a couple different roles of the king and the queen, right? He goes into that later in the chapter, but I think it's important to point out that he's like, the King Solomon is entering in the relationship, right, where he's being informed from above, right, from the north, and that he's bringing up from the south, in some sense. He's lifting it up.
Yeah, I just want to point out. So the last time that we saw something like this, although it wasn't exactly the same, it was chapter 79, the rainbow and other covenants. Oh, weird. That was the name of the last chapter. Oh, and it was right at the end. How strange. And the only significant difference is the little well, the center, what's in the center of the center item, and the bottom of the where the little question marks and the circles are, which I don't think we've seen any question marks and circles inside of time before, right? But you can see he's slowly in the diagrams integrating components that you've already seen in other contexts to show you their right relationship. And then what he's done here is he's reintroduced that I don't, what do I want to call it? The advanced tree symbol at this point, because the thing previously in this other chapter that is popped out, right? And then you'll see that later. And that's actually it's these little things that we'll say aren't so little that are easy to miss, that sort of show you the relationship at the layer above to the layer below, right? And then I guess I want to be careful how I say this, but that the fullness of the symbolic ordering happens at our layer, not the personal private perspective layer, right? Not your layer, our layer, right? The layer of humans as such. So if you want to be a humanist, that's as close as you're going to get under the king. Every humanist is now angry with me. Oh well. But yeah, I mean, I think that's the easiest and best way to sort of view what's happened here. So, well, one way to think about this is, and it's sort of be a fun project, someday, which I'll never do, is to grab all the diagrams like this that are similar and just look at them in order of how they appear in the chapters. And it's like, oh no, right? Because you're going to see a whole different, you're going to see everything differently with all the labels even, right? But just, flipbook style, this to this to the, wait a minute, right? You're going to see a whole bunch of different relationships pop out. But I just wanted to make that clear, because again, we're reintegrating all of these things that we've seen before and talked about in multiple contexts previously into this context. I'm going to call it sort of the complete context, right? Which is our joining of heaven to earth, or something like that, as we'll get into, right? Because you can see which is which. So that's kind of the whole point, and you can see the relationship to one another.
So I want to propose a name for the tree, and it's addressed tree. So it's dressed up, but it's also addressed. So just nice word joke. So in the coming part, a bunch of things stood out to me in the sense of they're talking about bringing in, right? So there's like a transfer of things into other realms, and they get participation, right? So we were talking about the fig tree, right? And how it's like not having it like a primary role, but it's like well, I don't want to say decorative, but like a supportive role, right? Where it's partaking in the wholeness instead of like being the center or the source or something. And so like what's happening from the King of Tyre, right, is like he's providing the cedar trees, right? And the cedar trees, they get incorporated in the temple, right? And they're like pillars, right? So the thing from above, right, like the thing in the north, is providing the pillars that hold up the temple. And also with that, the north gets incorporated, right? Like that's also really important. There's an incorporation happening. Yeah, I don't know if we want to get into it, but like rafts are the binding together, right? So there's a binding together going over the sea. You can make an analogy to the ark. And then they're split again. And then the return, right, or the giving up is the food, right? Like this is back going to Abraham, hosting the three angels from heaven, right? And so there's also a refinement, right? You can look at it as he's supplying the firewood to cook, right? So something is is being cooked, something is being refined and given back up to him. Yeah, and so going to Christopher's cut stone. So heavy stones to lay the foundation of the house, right? Which is interesting, right? So I was thinking about stones in distinction to land, right? And so like, what are stones? Well, stones are like refined land, right? Or land that is to participate in man, right? Especially in the building, right? We're talking about the builders selecting stones as well, right? Like these stones fit, these stones don't fit. But it's interesting that the stones they come from the heavenly aspect. They don't come from the earthly domain, right? So and I think this has to do with the understanding, right? So like that what stands under the temple is provided by the wisdom of the Lord. And yeah, so they're also solid, right? Like they're in some sense unmovable, right? Like they don't they aren't subject to time, um, and also not to flooding, right? Like they're like stones don't flood.
I want to add a couple of things to this. So you have the covenant between Solomon and Hiram, and in this case, Hiram is in many ways masculine to him. He's kind of like the Japheth role in relation to Shem, and he's coming from the north, from Lebanon, which I think means white, and then he's providing. He's also providing expertise. Like his guys really know how to cut down wood. Solomon has a lot of wisdom, but he knows also when to outsource these things to the people who are appropriate for it. There's a sort of intermingling of the workers, and then you have the raising of food and matter also for Hiram. So you have the thing of Solomon kind of giving the king of Tyre an order to give a command himself to his own guys. And then you have the king of Tyre saying, "Oh, you're going to accomplish my will in giving food for my household." So you have the kind of the feminine raising food going on there. And then I wanted to add also that the trees are coming from Lebanon, which means white, but cut cedar when it's fresh is pinkish red. And so, and over time, after you've cut it and it's been used to establish space, it actually becomes pale. And so there is something kind of going on there with this is the heavenly guy providing renewal for a space that is not in his own land. He's helping establish space for the guy who is dressing and addressing this particular address that he's establishing. And but yeah, and then you have the red of the wood sort of contrasted there by the straightness of the cut stones.
Yeah, so I wanted to add the trees are affording the vertical, right, in the building. So they're affording the vertical dimension, while the stones, right, they're resisting nature, right, like from entering the building. Everyone
I'm also
okay?
thinking you were saying. Yeah, I was also thinking that on the foundation stone, they're supposed to be sturdy and unmovable. But if they do move, they carry a lot more momentum than other things. So there's more implications that things that happen if a foundation moves than if like some other piece on top of that moves. So.
Yeah, so again, like the Nord provides height, right? Like it provides the heavenly aspect, or at least the ability to house it or something, or incorporate. That's just a better word. the incorporation of it.
Yeah, I mean, again, I think I think the purpose of this is to draw the analogy, not make it explicit. The correspondence is in the diagram, right? It doesn't need to be worded to death. You can just say, oh yeah, these patterns in this diagram applied at the layer at our layer, right? The layer of us as humans has a certain correspondence, right? But the problem with equating it in words is that implicitly we'll say psychologically, which I think is a valid use here, even though psychology is fundamentally flawed. Your brain says, oh, it works the same, but it doesn't work the same at all, right? Scale matters. And so the scale of what you do on earth is not the same as the scale of what happens in heaven at all. And so doing the same thing doesn't have the result that you expect ever, especially if you're trying to look at these things. Because when you look at something higher, you can't even see it. You're only seeing a tiny part of it. You don't know which part, and you don't know how much, right? And so a bunch of and you're not seeing all the things it's attached to. Whereas when you engage at we'll say our layer, the layer of people on the planet, we'll say in community under a head, that type of body behaves completely differently from your body, right? There are some parallels to be drawn, right? But they should be drawn poetically and not propositionally. Because you don't want to link all of heaven and earth together into us, because we can't bear either, right? We can't keep the flood of earth away from us, right? And we can't keep the weight of heaven. We can't hold the weight of heaven above us. We can't do either, right? Which is why we draw them together rather than being crushed between them. Which is just a very different, and this is why when people say opponent processing, I'm just like, oh, you're being crushed by your attempts to flatten the world. Heaven and hell are squeezing you down, right? That's all I ever hear. And I'm like, yeah, you're in opposition. So you're trying to push hell down and push heaven up or something, and you can't do that. And so you got to be careful drawing those parallels because they're implicit in the diagrams. So yeah, you just deal with it at the layer that it's intended, which is there's a peoples to the north and a peoples to the south. There are different relations with those peoples. And in that relation, something beautiful emerges. Aside from everything else, like I don't know if you caught this, but peace, right? In other words, the implication here is that trade is a method of making peace from your enemy neighbors. But how? Not we'll say mere banal trade of goods, but exchanging goods for the purpose of something above. And I think that's actually true. I think you can actually prove it. And this is why I don't like, the way people use, at least in the United States, I use the term politics because they're looking across and not up. And this is saying, no. The cooperation upwards is the thing that brings the peace, not the trade, right? There is a way in which trade can bring peace, but it's cooperation upwards and not, we'll say, trade across.
I think there's one extra thing, right? Because he's providing the workers, right? So there's a maintenance of identity and specialization, right? So he's not like, oh, come here and teach us. No, it's like, you do the work, you're responsible, and thereby I accept my dependence upon you because I can't do this. Like,
yeah, no, that's a good point. Like everyone has their place in the hierarchy, and the differentiation is good, and trying to incorporate them in that way, in other words, to make them equal wouldn't be good. And that's why equality is not good. Say it everywhere. Say it all the time. Equality is not good. It's kind of explicit. I don't know why people are missing it. If equality, then evolution wrong. I think I don't know what frame people are using to think equality is not like a bad thing, but also equality is a bad thing.
Yeah, and it would also, like, if you, well, I wouldn't say equalize, but integrate or something, right? If you absorb the North, for example, it would remove your ability to have the trade, right? Because it's like, what is trading with what? Like, it doesn't make any sense anymore, right? And then you lose the ability to be grateful, right? Like, and you use your position. All of these things that they get lost in that.
Yeah, that's a good point, right? Integration, not absorption. And this is the fundamental misunderstanding of the United States and the melting pot. It's an integration. It's not it's not an absorption. We're not absorbing other cultures. We're integrating other cultures into ours. And we can argue about what that looks like, but making differentiation is super important.
Yeah, so also the North is required to establish, right? Like, so that's not an option without the North. Like,
yeah, maybe we could highlight RJ's latest comment there. I think it was really good.
I have the comments behind.
I figured you weren't seeing RJ's comments, but I wish you'd jump in, but that's okay.
Which one?
The latest one is fine. Like I thought that was really a really good, astute observation. Yeah, this idea that extreme inequality is chaotic and extreme equality flattens and crushes things. And so it's not a balance in that way, but it is a balance. In other words, you need to discern how much, and that line will change, right? Balance is an action, not a state. A lot of this stuff can be just cleared up with the language, right? Like, equal treatment is not equality, because equality is a state and equal treatment is an action. And so once you understand that they seem like little things, they're not little things. Once you understand the difference between like actions and conditions or states or descriptions, it's like, oh, I see how this is supposed to work. And so, yeah, you need that. You need that that balance. And I think his next comment's good too, right? That he's saying here that the line between those things is the place where you meet to cooperate. Exactly. And negotiate the line. Like, you have to have they've got the demilitarized zone between North and South Korea, and that's where they meet and have meetings, right? In the neutral space. That's why there's a neutral space. That's why there has to be a neutral space. You need it's not an optional thing. Like, you've got to have one, because the neutral space is where the mediation occurs, right? And the mediation determines good and bad, or not necessarily good and bad, but it determines the primacy of thing A over thing B. And then you should maintain that neutrality, even if you move the neutral space, we'll say, because that's important. And neutral spaces move in different ways. Like, having a neutral zone that's physical and doesn't move doesn't mean your stance of the armies on either side of the neutral zone doesn't change, right? It's still mediated. It's just you're not mediating the physical line, because there's no need to. And maybe someday there will be, right? Maybe someday you can mediate North and South to the point where there's no more line needed and there's only a hole. I don't know, but the need for the moment is for that neutral space. And I think there's always a neutral space somewhere, we'll say, right? Because there's always the demarcation between the center and the margin.
So I think I want to reframe it a little bit. I think it's not inequality, it's difference, right? So, because it's like, if you're all the same, right, then like things get flattened and crushed, and if you're too different, you can't relate, right? And so when we're talking about the line and the mediation, right, that means that the one thing has interests that correlate or something, or connect, maybe that's the better word, to the interest of the other, right? Because if and I think this is where the idea of barbarians, right, like the people who are not cultured, right, they're so distinct that we can't have proper relationships with them, right? Like trade is not possible, cooperation is not possible, and that's not because of inequality, right? Like that's because there's not a shared space, like there's not a shared reference um, that allows us to come to mutual agreement, especially across time, right? Like you might like have an instance of an interaction with the barbarians, but in 2 years time they'll stand at your border, right? Like and also like the intentions of the barbarians are also unintelligible, right? So like there's no place for trust, right? And so like if they become like Greeks, right, where you're sharing in some sense an ancestor, right, then you still might have wars, right? But the wars were not fought to kill, right? The wars were fought in a different domain where it was over primacy as opposed to yeah, just like life and death things, right? And
Yeah,
because I
I want to pop in here real quick, Manuel, and just point out something that maybe people have missed. It's not entirely orthogonal to the book, we'll say. The recent conception of barbarians as lower would, or lesser, would not have been how the Romans would have seen them at all. They just would have seen them, to your point, as different and not equal because they're different. And our anachronistic projection of equality is oddly, no one's probably noticed this, is oddly only on the vertical axis. And equality is explicitly, we'll say in quote, modern times, or in the age of gnosis, as I like to say, seen as a problem of the existence of verticality as such. In other words, someone being above and someone being underneath. And the Romans and Greeks and ancient peoples, and probably everybody before Napoleon, didn't actually think that way at all, ever, about any other group. And so that's like really important that no, this is a problem we've created for ourselves as a result of materialism and individualism and the objective worldview. That's not a worldview that was common or the norm or a worldview that anybody else would have had, historically speaking. This is a uniquely quote modern or uniquely recent way of thinking about the world. And I will add that it's likely part of why we'll say conservatives and quote liberals don't understand each other, because liberals think conservatives think that way and conservatives don't actually think that way on average. And so it's just a misread all around, but it's a very common one. It's not that the barbarian saying bar 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 was seen as lesser. It was seen, as you've outlined, Manuel, as, well, that means we can't really have enough in common with them to do the level of trade we want. It doesn't mean they have less sophisticated social dynamics or less sophisticated politics or less sophisticated armies, because often the barbarians won. In fact, ultimately they won. So it wasn't an issue of sophistication the way we would cast it today. I wonder if that's mostly a post Otto von Bismarck sort of way of thinking about the world, because the Germans have philosophically just annihilated Western society single-handedly, although they had a lot of help from the French. So I wanted to point that out.
Yeah, and this really clicks with a conversation I recently had where somebody was really refusing to see the richness of the world and see these distinctions not purely as a vertical thing, because if he does embrace distinction, then he immediately sees that as a vertical thing, and then that puts him in an arrogant position, and he doesn't want to be arrogant. So that's like a big kind of danger, threat, like the thing that's holding him back. It's a barrier, because he doesn't want to be arrogant, right? And that's like, whether that's a problem,
Well, that is
maybe
also
not.
arrogant.
Yeah.
Wait, Gustavs, is this a European?
Yes. A Catholic, in fact.
Inconceivable.
So, so these modern developments, right? I think they're related to mapping the world, right? So, like, if the world is alien, right, and that's how it was under a fog of war. From the fog of war, the serpent appears, or the tiger and the lion, right? So all the danger lurks there. So you have to respect the barbars, even if they're stupid and dull. And I also, since we mentioned psychology, bad Mark, I also think what's been happening beyond that is we started mapping the personal, right? We got the same issue internalized that we had externalized first, I think.
Well, it's not just mapping the person, it's mapping the person with respect to itself. That's the individualism. And that's why I think there's only two words in psychology that don't refer to, we'll say, single items, right? All of psychology pretty much references quote individuals, or references a single thing. And that's a bad way to understand anything in the world, because part of the project of this book is to show you your place and how you're connected in the world, which might be helpful for, I don't know, combating, just make up some random term that no one's ever heard of, the meaning crisis, something. I don't know. Just whatever. Random thoughts.
Well, and now we're going to get to the arch enemy of the meaning crisis, and also the introduction of the alien, which is the Queen of Sheba, and she is in some sense a barbar.
I want to mention about something about the relationship with Hiram and Solomon before we go to her, actually.
Okay.
So something with this, I want to kind of reference this line that Matthieu has about that on a smaller scale, the descent and materialization of the heavenly seed. I just want to point out just some more of the masculine, feminine stuff that's going on, because there's actually some things in this Bible excerpt down below from 1 Kings 9-10 that isn't completely in here. I think it's good the way that he did it, but I just want to kind of point out a few things. So the first line there, the Solomon offered burnt offerings and peace offerings on the altar that he built for the Lord. Thus he finished the house. That's where the house is finished. But there's an important thing that isn't in this, which again, like, you only have so much space, but he did it 3 times a year. So he finished the house, but he's doing this 3 times a year. It wasn't a one-off or anything like that. He's staying consistent about this. He also does this after God appears to him and says, I have consecrated this house that you have made for me, and my name will remain there forever. But then he also says, if you turn away from me, then I'm going to lay it to waste, and it'll be a hiss and a byword for anybody. So it's a very explicit thing, like, yeah, you made this, but also, like, I'm the reason why this thing is existing. And then to the point of the kind of the expansion of the perspective, there's also an expansion of the matter that's being raised. So you see here that let me see. So it says that King Solomon made a ship, but he made an entire fleet of ships on the shore of the Red Sea at a place that was called Ezion Geber, which means backbone of man, which is near Eloth, which means palm grove. And then on the Red Sea in the land of Edom, which means red, which is also an alternative name for Esau, which also means red. So you have a lot of this kind of like pillar of space next to red on red over and over again kind of happening there. And then you have the fact that it's Hiram's seafarers going in Solomon's naval vessels. And then something that doesn't get mentioned is that included with the feeding of Hiram's people, King Solomon gave the king of Tyre 20 cities. And a lot of the work of the Solomon's workers is actually foreign slaves from the surrounding areas. So he has integrated the people. He's not necessarily sending Israelites, right, to be doing the work with. He's raising the people of like the Jebusites and the other people, the Amorites and the Hittites, from around, and then he's raising their matter up, and then kind of giving their work along with the skilled craftsmen and seafarers of the guy from above as well. So you're really seeing this kind of raising from below, and then or from the outside as well. To your point about the barbarians, like they're not necessarily less sophisticated, but they're also, you know, they're being kind of drawn in and then sent up for these particular purposes.
I just want to add a couple of words. Proper raising by the head.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, you and I can't do that.
Right.
It's not our job to raise. We're not the head. Right. A lot of people get confused and they go, "Oh, I see the pattern of Solomon and now I can do that." No, you can't. The pattern doesn't work that way for you. You're not the king. And a lot of people get confused. They insert themselves in the story in a part of the story that they're not a part of. The purpose of a story is for you to find what part of that story you inhabit and not assume it's the starring role or the hero or whatever nonsense they're spewing at you this week to psyop you, by the way. Don't believe any of that. Like, find where you fit and don't do the things that aren't allowed to be done by the station that you fit into ever. Like, please, you're corrupting the system. Just stop.
And like I wanted to respond a little bit, right? So the timber, right, came down in flotsams, right, and is refined into ships, right, which are like arcs. And I assume that these ships are then sent out, right? So there's in some sense like there's an insemination from above, and then there's a reproduction of that pattern, but refined back down, right? And I think we're going to see that that refinement of what comes from above, right? Like, okay, so like we Sheba heard of the fame of Solomon, right? That means he's established, right? That means that the temple is in effect, like that means that the wisdom has come to fruition, and that she's now there to partake in the wisdom, right? And so she came to test him with riddles. Well, what's a riddle? Well, a riddle is an asking, right? Like it's asking from below. It's a prayer, right? Can you answer me? Can you give the divine expression of of this thing that doesn't have a principle to house it? So in some sense, there's like the mediation from the north to the rest of the world, like we were saying, like the builders that he called in or whatever, right? Or now the secondary stage in some sense is it's a refinement, or maybe not the refinement is the best word, right? It's an embodiment of that which comes from above, right? So in some sense it's like he created the arena for participation, and I think that's maybe what the temple is, right? So like, okay, if we get all the house built, right, the right foundation, then we can be in right relationship, right? And then from that right relationship we can direct others.
I have a bunch of thoughts on this whole fragment about Sheba. That, yeah, it's kind of like what Manuel says, but it's like this relationship with Sheba is merited by, or like caused by the stuff he does with Hiram. So the stuff with Hiram, the building of the temple, is sort of primary, and then Sheba sort of hears about that and goes to see it by herself. But I don't. I don't think that was the intention of Solomon. That's kind of like a second order thing that it happens, and that maps onto the whole thing about the structural and then the ornamental. And Sheba is definitely ornamental in this sense. Everything she brings as well is not structurally functional, like gold and jewels and the incense. It's not. You can kind of build the temple without it, but it's a nice finishing touch. And it's all the stuff from deep in the earth, that kind of stuff. And then it's really interesting, this whole thing about how Sheba comes to look for Solomon. It's like she's heard of this wonderful thing somewhere else, and just goes to find a worthy master for herself, and that's really special. I don't think you see that anywhere else, really. It's just so unique, distinct. It's this kind of, I don't know, voluntary, not even submission to a principle, because in general the way order and heaven and earth works, or is portrayed in this in this thing, is that heaven imposes itself on earth, and then that's kind of a good relationship. But in this case, it's the other way around almost. It's like the earth, the Sheba, is giving herself, but it's still through a riddle, so he still has to kind of prove himself, but she's displaying her willingness. It's really interesting, and it's interesting how the stuff with Sheba really does tend to map onto like the Protestant difficulties with a lot of stuff, like the Protestant difficulties with the feminine and with ornamentation, like with gold and incense. Like, it's really uncanny, and there's something there.
So it's almost as if these patterns were more real. That, as Jordan Peterson would say, yeah, I wanted to step in a number of good things in there, Gustas. Thank you for that, for talking about that. So I want to make a distinction between the stranger and something exotic. So the stranger is the warring tribe to the north, and the exotic is the person coming out of the south you never heard of. Or heard of, but didn't have any interaction with one way or another, right? And then they each bring something different, right? So the person you're in a conflict with, or the tribe you're in a conflict with, they're what they're good at. You know them. Your enemy. They're your enemy. Like, you gotta, you're wrestling with them. There's participation there, right? This person doesn't know you, and you don't know them. So in essence, the only trade, the only thing, the only value they can bring is ornamentation, right? But that ornamentation is super valuable in some sense. It's more valuable because they're willing to come out of hiding, right? And stop being so exotic, but maintain their exotic nature in cooperation, right? And the other point I want to make, which I think is super important, is there is a pattern here that I don't think anybody, in the general population alive today really understands. Okay, because it's a little complex. Sheba is implied to be playing the role of the Sphinx, right? From Greek mythology, with the questioning. If that is something you're going to take on, and I don't recommend that you do, because you're a Muppet and you're probably out of your depth. I'm sorry, you're probably just out of your depth. And to the extent that you aren't, I mean, are you sure you want to be the gatekeeper? Because that's what it is. You are a gatekeeper if you are doing this critique. But actually what she's doing is proper critique, which is to say, I have a number of questions, right? But then when those questions are answered adequately, so that implies she knows what an adequate answer looks like, at least when she gets one, then I will integrate. I will no longer critique. I will stop fighting, right? And the reason why it's important that you don't do that unless you know how is because if you have questions and you can't tell if they're properly answered, but you get an answer, the proper response is actually for you to submit sorry, bro. Are you sure you want to be the critique? Are you sure you want to critique? Are you sure you want to question? Because if your questions are answered at all, then you're screwed. You're screwed. Because you're no longer the gatekeeper. You can no longer keep that gate. And you have to open that gate, which means letting them in. Are you sure you want to walk up to some random person on Twitter and let them in by critiquing them? Because that's what you're doing, whether you realize it or not, right? This is a pattern, as pointed out earlier. It's a true pattern in the world that will happen. And so the proper role for critique is, and there's nothing, look, you want to do that, that's fine. Be prepared to submit to the person if they can answer your questions. And so if you don't have a sense of how those questions can be adequately answered, we'll say truthfully, then don't ask the stupid question, because you're putting yourself in grave danger by doing that. Now, if you're already submitted to somebody, you want to ask them a stupid question or an unknown question, that's fine. You're already submitted. It's not an issue. But those are different conditions, and the starting conditions matter. Are you starting submitted, or are you starting as a gatekeeper? Because if you meet somebody on the street, and you don't say hello to them, you're a gatekeeper against that interaction. Like that's just part of how you are in the world all the time, because the world is mostly you filtering things out, right? 99.8% of things are filtered out. We're big fat filters. And so you've got to be careful when you employ this gatekeeping and be aware of what you're gatekeeping. And so critique is not something you should be doing casually at all. You can be very careful with it. Very careful.
Yeah, so I wanted to introduce an answer to Gustav, right? And it's like, what was the curse of Eve? You will desire after your husband. So she's her desire is she's seeking the masculine right above her, and she's gatekeeping Solomon, right? So, but that's like the proper role of a woman, right? Like you don't want to have someone above you that's not fit to be there, right? Like that can't answer. And also it has like he established the house of God first, right? Then she came, right? Like there's a bunch of things happening there. And also
that seems very self-aware of her.
Yes, that's the other thing that
you
I
know.
want. The other thing I wanted to go into, right? She's coming from the south, but she's not a barbarian in the modern sense, right? She's from an established civilization that has access to gold, to stones, like to a whole bunch of things. She has camels carrying this stuff, right? Like she's not a nobody, right? Like she knows what she wants because she has, right? Like she's achieved, she's accomplished in life. Like she's not like a nobody, and I think that's also the reason that she can judge, at least because you can't judge the answer, right? But you can judge that the answer is not wrong. So you can't judge the rightness of it. And
Well,
I think
not necessarily, but I mean, you can know you can know for yourself if there is an answer that will satisfy you. And if the answer is satisfied and the house is built, I don't think she, I don't think she necessarily had to know what would happen when she engaged, right? If you just follow the pattern, you'll know how to complete the pattern effectively, right? So if you follow the patterns, you don't need to know the outcome or say, well, I'm either going to go home and not integrate, or I'm going to go there and integrate by giving ornaments. Like that's, you take your ornaments with you because that's what you have that's valuable to others, right? Because that's the fruits of your civilization. And then, and presumably too, by the way, there's a lot packed into that story, right? Because presumably the reason why there isn't ornamentation to the north is because of the conflict. Like if you're in constant conflict, even if it's on and off conflict, you don't have time to build baubles. You're putting all all your efforts, right, towards things of war. Like that's what you're doing, and that's what you should do. By the way, like that's the proper interaction.
Yeah, so I want to stand still with the breathless, right? So you need your breath to speak, right? And like one way that you know that you've been answered is if you run out of questions. If you can't ask any more than like, yeah, you're at the end of that road.
I'm going to just point this out. I'll make a larger point as we get closer to the end of this chapter, but the connection between being breathless and then returning to her own land. So, like, she was satisfied. She received and meanwhile, and this is something that doesn't get really mentioned too much in here, but it says in between all the stuff that's happening that the King of Tyr and Solomon's guys are like going on adventures and getting treasure and stuff like that. Like the relationship is still going, and then the Queen of Sheba is like, "Wow, I've seen everything. Like I'm so impressed. Here's a whole bunch of gifts. Okay, bye." And then like no more relationship. Like there's nothing holding the bottom of this balance anymore, and she's just like, okay, I've been informed, and then I'm satisfied, off I go. We don't, we're done here. Like, yeah, we don't have to keep on doing these things. And I'll make a larger point later, but that's what I want to leave with for now.
Well,
Yeah.
also this, yeah, Castle, that's amazing because the Queen of Sheba up and leaving, it's a repeat of the pattern of Noah and Ham, of Ham uncovering the father, kind of being in the middle, and Sheba is Hamite, right? She's from the southern part of the world, and so her removing this covering, right? It's kind of showing that maybe Solomon wasn't as worthy as even though he's very worthy, maybe he wasn't worthy enough to keep her, basically.
Yeah, he couldn't integrate her. Like she gives her stuff, but she doesn't leave any of her guys, or like there were no cities for her, because also she's the one that's supposed to be hosting. So Solomon doesn't go to live in her lands, or any of that. But yeah, that's a really good point.
Yeah, that goes again to the maintenance of identity, right? Because like, if she would have married, they would have merged the lands. So, yeah, just I'm gonna scroll. I have nothing to say until the end of the page. So, if anybody wants to stop, we have the red here, right? We already talked about it.
Yeah, there is the fully answered. Right. Similar to the Sphinx, and that's all in here, right? But the fully answered is really important. And the idea of the contrast in the Kings of Tyre, right? Wisdom split the tree and built the house. So that's super important.
Yeah, so I think the word support here, right? Like the cherubim support, like she supports. In some sense, this goes back to the thing I've been talking a lot about, being tested, right? Like how do you know your house, the house that you build is a good house? Well, something needs to come into your house and test it, like else you'll never know. So you need to be, like, maybe that's the thing, right? Like you need to be exposed, but you need to be exposed in your nature, not in your nakedness. Like maybe that's a distinction there. Like, so something like we were talking about this earlier, right? Where there's like this invasive way of I don't know, like connecting to somebody, right? Like where you're not using the proper mediation. And she was hosted, right? Like that's maybe right. So he got to present himself instead of that she came in and like saw him naked. And so I think spices, right? Their refinement of the land, right? Gold is a refinement of metal, and the precious stones is like a refinement of earth or the stones, right? So it's interesting because the way I'm seeing it, right, like the decorative stones, you lift them up, right? Like you place them in a crown, right? Like they're supposed to be at a high position, right? So the stones that come from below, right? They somehow get put on top after they're refined, right? Because they're picked out of the multiplicity of stones, and the stones that came from above, they were put under, right, as a support. Um, and the gold, I guess, like if you look at what they do with gold, is like you cover things with gold, right? So that's like gold plating. And I guess the spices are related to scent and atmosphere. Um, but yeah, like I found, and I still can't really grasp it with my mind, but there's something where the top becomes the bottom and the bottom becomes the top, in version with the decoration. And I guess that's like the value or something, right? Like the top only gets value by which it participates in the lower, and the lower only gets value in as much as it can be raised up. Um, yeah, I don't have much here.
Well, I mean, the diagram's interesting, right?
Mhm.
The idea that this all comes together, and again, I don't care for the use meta, in this meta space, which, one way to think about this is the continuation of space as the result of time. Otherwise, space doesn't continue, right? It just is. And another way to think about this is the difference between linear and discrete, which is space, and continuous, and nonlinear, which is time. So you'll notice that space is always lines and boxes, and time is a circle with an arrow indicating movement. And that's the difference between linear and discrete, and continuous and nonlinear, like curved. There's lots of nonlinearity, but curves are one of them. Circles are another one. And I mean, I like the more cyclical pattern better than the Ouroboros pattern, but this is the best you can get, actually. So I understand why every culture uses it. It's not a coincidence. It's the most concise way to express it, as long as you understand that it's not exactly a circle of the same smoothness, we'll say, all the time. And that's sort of represented by the breaking of the circle here at the top. You'll notice it's not a complete circle. Uh-oh, I bet you didn't notice, right? It's easy to miss. And then the idea of, look, you look at the bottom, we're still talking about Sheba. We're still talking about our level, right? Matthieu has done a brilliant job of linking this back at the end of it to say, no, our level, right? This is how these symbols not only interface with what's above us and below us, but with us, and how they afford us a relationship, a vertical causality, ridiculous, a symbolic relationship with the things above us and below us, right? And how to order that relationship as an ordered group, right? So not as an individual, because individuals are impossible, not as a single person off in the distance, right? But as an ordered group. Once you have the ordered group, which you should endeavor to develop, because that's what happens when you get cast from the garden. That now you can have other ordered groups and still have the proper relationship with the cosmos, roughly speaking, because he does say it's cosmic symbolism. So I feel justified in using the word cosmos, even though stupid science word. But I see why he did it. It's brilliant.
It's
So,
a
yeah,
Greek titan, right? Cosmos.
yeah, that's it. Well, that's what I mean. It's in the title. Yeah, I think also, you know, that series by Carl Sagan, as much as I liked it, loved Carl Sagan, did a lot of harm to the collective psyche of our culture. That's for sure. Talking about cosmos from a scientific standpoint, and using, of all things, uh, um, basically astrology, right, to understand the world.
Yeah, I just realized someone is talking about Kairos from the scientific perspective. Seems like the same pattern there. So, yeah, I actually didn't study this picture correctly, but the first thing that popped up in my mind is magnets, right? It's the north attracting the south, and like they click together, right? So like there's and they're like stones in some sense, right? So there's like and you can also see, right, like the meta space, right? Like I like the idea of a spiral, right? So you have the spiral up, but you also have the spiral like this, right? And if you have something that hangs under it, like one of these trains, right, that goes under the spiral like this, there's these revolutions, right, or the going into the next generation, while still maintaining the attachment to the principle that upholds whatever is below, right? And then these generational changes, they allow for the reshuffling of the order below it without ever losing the connection to the principle.
Right, and you'll just notice that science breaks that beginning point because it will not acquiesce to a creation. And so when you see the astronomers say, we're not moving in a straight line, things aren't circular, it's really this, spiral corkscrew pattern through space, and it's not attached to anything. That's not a coincidence, right? That's science dissecting the world and then coming to the patterns are inevitable, so they're still there, right? They're there at every scale. They're there at the cosmic scale of the universe, the galaxy, or whatever nonsense. Doesn't matter. It's funny. It doesn't. They haven't figured out practicality. It doesn't matter what scale you look at astronomy from. That you kind of see the spiral pattern, but they don't begin it anywhere. It's not attached to anything. This is the difference. What this book does, what this commentary does, is attach everything back to the beginning. That's it. That's the whole book. We didn't need to do this. We could have just said, here's what the book does. See you later. Bye.
We should have never begun, then we wouldn't have had a beginning, right?
Well, that's why we had to wander in the desert for 40
Right.
sessions. To be fair.
But yeah, so I wanna like you have this progress, because we've been talking about progress, right? And there's like a progress where you're progressing towards the refinement of the adherence of, and thereby the fulfillment of the adherence to the principle, right? So that's a type of progress, but then you're never losing sight of the thing that unifies you, right? And there's a type of progress which is fail forward, right? Like it's like running in a direction, right? And leaving your origin behind you, right? And at a certain point, like it's not relevant where you came from, because you're running, and the running part is relevant, not where you came from. Which is also how they look at life, by the way. Yeah, so my last comment on Sheba is that she came to taste the fulfillment. I think that's kind of what her role was, to taste.
I think are we getting to the end of this page now?
Yes.
The I want to just kind of address the not necessarily the dangers of the strange woman, although that'll come up here, but that her departure from King Solomon hints at the future downfall of the king. I really, and I got to do it. The footnote here, the word Shiva resembles the word seven. So you've got the Queen of Seven showing up. She is the one with the ornamentation and the spices and everything. So she is this sort of Sabbath character that is, Solomon spends all of his time explaining to her and informing, her and everything. She's completely satisfied. There's all of this information that has then been put into the rest, essentially. And then she departs. So, and what happens actually the next sentence after it says, it's not in this, but as soon as it says, so she turned and went back to her own land with her servants, it immediately goes to, now the weight of gold that came to Solomon in 1 year was 666 talents of gold, besides that which came from the explorers and the businesses and the merchants and the surrounding kings and everything. And so you're getting this thing of extreme space. It's all 6, right? Your 7 has gone away. And then it goes and it says that he was making shields out of gold. He was making all of the drinking ware was gold. All of the vessels that would handle any sort of liquid, all gold. Made a throne out of ivory that was surrounded by statues of lions, right? And so you're getting like heaven being completely stretched down to the floor. And you've got, and there were 6 steps, and even those were surrounded by lions and everything. And so the entire thing, and then Hiram is still doing work, right? He's still bringing treasure all day long from his adventures up north. Interestingly, you've got the Red Sea adventures, and so you've got the waters above, right? And so that's where all these things are kind of being transferred down. Nothing is coming down from below, and it comes to the point where they have so much gold that silver becomes irrelevant, so that silver becomes as stone. And that it was completely worthless. So you just got this whole stretching down of gold, and then what happens right after everything is made of gold? It says, and I think I made a comment about this in yesterday's live stream, this thing of like, you have so much information and you're so focused on explaining and cutting down and refining things. And then the next bit in 1 Kings 11 is that Solomon loved many women from foreign lands, specifically the lands that he made slaves from as well. And then it says, from the nations concerning which the Lord had said to the people of Israel, you shall not enter into marriage with them. And he had 700 wives and 300 girlfriends from those lands, right? And so it's like you've got a clean 1,000. Like everything, it's just he's massively integrating these things because he has no intermediation. It's all gold, and then immediately 1,000 foreign wives. And then what do you have right after that? You have Nebuchadnezzar, the Babylonian, destroys the temple after Solomon turns away from God. And then Nebuchadnezzar does the whole thing we looked at with the golden statue. And then he gets goaded by being sent out into the field to eat grass or whatever for a while. And it's like it's the same pattern played out on the in foreign lands.
Yeah, because he took him, right? Like so yeah, I wanted to add, because I just realized, right? She turned, right? Like, why do you turn? Because you lose interest. Why do you lose interest? Because there's no place for you.
Yeah, she couldn't be integrated. And to the previous point, like if he had married her, like even if she was from a land that was like, you would have at least had that area locked down, right? And you wouldn't have like the 300 girlfriend problem and like all of that stuff.
Right, or he'd send his son or whatever, right? Like I guess because I do think it's still correct that he doesn't marry her, right? But like that doesn't mean that he can't send his son,
right?
So it's like yeah. Okay, now we're going to Mark's favorite part, so let's go fast before he's back.
We can do it.
Metacognitive
model of the universe. Let's go.
Yeah, I didn't have much to say about this, and I don't think we should say much, but I wanted to point at the distinction, right? So the spiritual is relating to the what, right? So when we're talking about what, we're talking about something that has an identity, that fits a purpose, right? So it's an identity is it's organized around something, and a purpose is it's embedded in what it holds, right? So there's the connection. It's like the seed in the soil or something. And the how is predominantly busy with descriptions and accuracy, right? And this is a framing that reciprocally narrows on certain aspects or qualities within the relationships, and ends up being blind to the external, right? And so Pageau goes into this in his own way, right? Well, it's on the next page. I'll leave it for that. That's all I had on this page. I just want to bully mark. We have metacognitive. There we go. So here we have a good display, right? So basically what it's saying is, well, it's trying to raise science up, but I'm looking at it the other way around, actually. Like because it's like, or is it not raising it up? I don't know.
Well, he's putting the scientific worldview inside of the symbolic worldview.
Okay, yeah, that's the way I was reading it. But yeah, that's the only proper place, right? Because like if you don't have embedding, then how are you to understand the results of what you find? Like it just doesn't make any sense. So that's our handmaid of religion.
Right. That's the refutation of Immanuel Kant, which would go a long way towards fixing everything. Is just never listening to German so-called philosophers or French so-called philosophers, and man, the whole world would improve overnight. Like I don't. It's so easy. Just assume they're retarded and don't listen to them, and all the problems vanish. It's pretty simple, actually. Yeah, I mean it. One thing was born from the other, right? Or like all things are born from and into the creation. Like why is this hard? This seems really easy to me. Everyone's struggling. I'm like, no, it takes 2 seconds. Like, and it's everywhere, right? Like I'm actually still embroiled in an argument about a book someone else wrote. I'm like, why don't you go read the words? The words don't actually require any interpretation. The sentences are quite clear, but no, I want my imagination. I want to have a magical fight with your interpretation. I didn't make an interpretation. I said that's not what the book says. You know, and it's critique and rebellion at every layer, right? And so he's trying to reinstantiate, you know, the proper hierarchy of science back into and under the symbolic interpretation, or the symbolic it's not interpretation, sorry, the symbolic integration of heaven and earth, right? So science has to serve the symbolic integration of heaven and earth. It may do that through the combination of theory and fact. And also science is just independent validation. It's a system of independent validation, which is totally useful, but also not not an understanding of anything. It's just a method of agreement, right? That is independent of the person making the claim, right? Or strives to be anyway. The replication crisis sort of says otherwise, that science is sort of corrupted in that way. But yeah, reinstantiating the hierarchy of we'll say this book and maybe one other book. See my live stream on navigating patterns from a couple of weeks ago, right? I think that's super important. It's not a battle between a book written by Darwin and the Bible. It's that Darwin knew and understood quite well that all of this was happening inside of creation, right? And as the result of that creation, and his science is sound, and unfortunately, everybody who read his book afterwards seems to not be well grounded. But this is the reinstantiation of the hierarchy.
So Mark, you say that there's this hierarchy and that Darwin's book, let's say, presupposes that thing above it, right? Because it's like this common thing in society and so on. But nowadays, do you think people can read it and not see that hierarchy above it?
Yeah, I mean, they do. They just like they understand the title of the book to be The Origin of Life and not The Origin of Species. And if you understand what species is, speciation is an ontology of biology. Right. It's not even the whole of science. It's not even the whole of natural science. It's just biology. Now, biology is the most interesting part of science, maybe. I mean, you can make that argument. I don't know. I kind of like airplanes. It doesn't involve biology, but what? Because science dances between, no, the most important science is, the science about, beings, right? And then it goes, no, the most important science is physics. And physics has nothing to do with beings. And it bounces between those all the time. And no one calls the little bastards out for it, right? I'm like, no, bro, which is more important? Is the physics that gives us planes and internet and electricity more important? Or is the more important part psychology and biology and evolution and all that nonsense, right? Genetics. Which one is it? You got to pick one. They're not talking about the same thing at all, right? One's talking about inanimate things. The other one's talking about animated things, right? And well, how do you integrate those? Well, you could integrate them, but you'd have to have the integration come down at you or emanate upon you from above. And that's all mature saying at the end of the day. And the whole battle is really over the biology people and the psychology people who desperately want to be in charge of everything, saying, no, we have the keys to the world because the world is people or something. And that's absurd. That's just crazy.
Yeah, so I'm not making this as like a suggestion or anything, but what about a kind of Queen of Sheba type scenario where the science goes looking for God?
Well, I would.
It can't.
Yeah, I want to make a point about the science is handmade of religion thing. So that old saying, like something, and maybe a lot of people aren't comfortable with it, but handmade is a type of slave. And like we've talked about this before, and like Mark has made really good points about and I've also given references of like Brazil, like a lot of times like people who sold themselves as slaves, a lot of times the big wealthy families are adopted as children essentially and are well educated and fed and cared for and sometimes even given, lofty positions. I mean, you even see this in like the biblical patriarchs and stuff. Like a lot of times they had slaves who wound up being in charge of their entire estate essentially. And I mean, that's also like Joseph in Egypt and stuff. Like but it's only after that submission and that acceptance of your place. And that point is actually made on the following page here. It's the only highlight I have on this one where it says, in reality, reconciling symbolic and materialistic worldviews would require scientists to fully acknowledge their place in the universe. And it's like, yeah, you can have, like, you actually can enjoy being a scientist and having your place and enjoying meaning coming along with that and everything, but it requires the subordination. And it is lower in the order of subordination.
One way to think of it, Gustavs, is science goes looking for God and loses its meaning. Of course, yes. What else would happen? How else would you expect this to unfold exactly? You can't really be that ignorant. Oh, no, you can. Carry on then. Also, what causes the meaning? You do. The science or your engagement in it. If it's at the personal level, it's your engagement in the science causes the meaning crisis. Nothing else causes the meaning crisis. Nothing. That's how easy this is to resolve.
To use the last chapter, right? Like, I think the way to think about science is building a temple in the spirit. Like, that's literally what it's doing, right? So it's just saying, okay, like, this is the foundation stone, and then we're going to place the stone here, and we're going to place the stone here, and then we're going to get a bunch of pillars, and we're going to, like, no, do a little bit this way, do a little bit that way, right? Like, that's what science is doing, right? And to answer your Queen of Sheba scenario, right? So what happened when Abraham hosted the angels? Right? He had the boy cut the meat. That's the scientist. It's the dissection. It's the thing that has lived, right? The thing that has become full, right? Making it into a specific, really tasty, right? Expression. Well, the feminine, right? It's taking the multiplicity, right? And it's binding the multiplicity together in order to make bread, which is like kind of bland, right? Like it's not as tasty as the meat, right? And so you can see how the modality of science is analogous to the boy, right? And that modality can never you can never dissect your way into the animal. like you can't build your way up into the animal from the meat. Like, that doesn't make any sense.
I want to also respond to the Queen of Sheba thing, because there is a useful, like, especially with this handmaid of a religion thing. It's, where else do you think of handmaids? Like, behold the handmaid of the Lord, let it be done to me according to your word. And it's just like, yeah, take the lowest place, right? And then be lifted up from the dunghill later. You don't do it for yourself. You don't go grasping for it. It's just like, yep, here I am. Tell me what to do. If it's like, oh, I'm going to go and, analyze some ridiculous thing for money or something, it's like, no, sorry, like, you're not under the mission, right? But if, like, you can totally do some really good science, but it can't be like individualistically, like, oh, this is what I'm going to do to get that grant from the government or something like that. It's like, no, that's not where the, like, actual useful science that's going to be contributing to something needs to be informed and directed from somebody higher.
Well, and also you got to understand, like, you actually have to study the history of science to some extent. Like, Einstein did not think he was going to get closer to God. This is explicit in what he wrote, right? He said things like, God doesn't play dice with the universe. He said that. He wrote that down. It's like, this isn't that hard. And so the early physicists that made all the progress, and there's been none since them, that might be a hint too, but there's been no progress in particle physics since, like, Einstein and a handful of other people. That's correct. Sabine Hassenfelder talks about this, but a lot of people talk about it. None, zero, zip. Why? Because they lost their way. Because they're trying to find something that they weren't trying to do that before. Like, Einstein wasn't trying to discover God through science. He's not stupid. Everybody who came after him might be, but that's a different problem. He was trying to, as the early alchemists were doing, right? They were trying to discover the rationality behind the material in the world that was already here, that pre-existed. They're like, oh, okay, well, there's an order, there's a pre-existing order that has been emanated into the material in which we were born, right, which we are surrounded with in our everyday life. And there is something that we can know about that. And in the knowing of that, we get closer to God. Now, that second part, I've got questions. But that is the thesis upon which all science is born. Not I'm directly looking at God, because unless you read like some vastly different version of the Old Testament, you don't even want that, because your face will burn off. Like I want to go burn my face off. I don't think you do. I got questions about your rationality. Like I just got questions. That's all, right? So that isn't even something you should want for. And so it's the inappropriate ordering and the inappropriate wanting, right? Because the knowing, such as it is, and we have endless arguments about what that word means and why it's important, has nothing to do with, we'll say, a direct interaction with God. None. Zero. Right? It has to do with the direct interaction with material. The side effect, the second order effect, is knowing God better by knowing his creation better. And again, I'm not even sure that that's correct.
So I think when we go down, we kind of have a good representation of the dialectic, because I actually think that this is what Hegel was talking about, right? So you have the system, right, which is embodied in the state, which is like, that's the really nasty one, right? Like, so he's taking it from the church to the state, right? But whatever, right? You have the authority that's established, right? And then something new arises, and then it needs to be incorporated, right? And the massive flaw of that is that you end up, well, we talked about this earlier this week, right? Like when you try to account for every error, every exception, and you start making rules around those, right? Because that's what that would mean. You get infinite complexity, and the system becomes a hamstring as opposed to something that liberates or lifts you up. And also, you have this idea, right, where the system becomes tyrannical, right, because people start relating to the system as a reality as opposed to reality as a reality. So
Well, and also I'll note that this is just a refutation of Hegel, right? And it is exactly the point. Science can't look up. That's what this says. Science can't look up. It can't look up. It can decide between A and B. That's what it can do. That's the dialectic. Is it A or is it B? That's the dialectic. The dialectic is not any of these other things people are saying it is at all ever. They're wrong. It's that simple. Like, they're symbolically incorrect. They're also incorrect in every other possible way, but different discussion, right? All it can do is make an A-B decision, a binary decision, and stick you in binary thinking in a flat world. Science makes a flat world. A flat world is an equal world. An equal world is a world where you can't discern anything at all. And that is the problem, right? When you think the tools of the flat world can somehow look for God or look up at all, that's where you make a mistake, and everything basically destroys itself with your help.
I think it's, you have to be able to look up before you can actually do the science bit right. You can't start with the science bit and then try to figure out how to look up from there,
yeah, that's Peterson's thing with combining anthrax and Ebola, right?
Yeah, exactly. That's a good example.
Yeah, so he's talking about things being outside, right? So you can say, whenever you do an experiment, you have a closed system. You can't account for the outside. Outside is always going to be there, because right now we're in Gödel, whatever. But we're not going to complete that part. Um,
I had an interesting idea today regarding this whole thing about the margin and sort of this like the impossibility of a totalizing system or something. Because in Christianity, it looks to me like, you know, Christ wins, and Christ has this, you know, the king of the cosmos and the emperor and all this stuff. But and he even defeats Satan in some way. But then there's still the Antichrist, right? There's still who doesn't seem to be Satan. Like it's something kind of different, which is like this, you know, the margin or the thing that doesn't quite fit in, which tends to come up when everything gets included. You know, when the empire grows to encompass all the world or something like that, which I think really works with this, you know, margin thingy.
well, I think the Antichrist thing, like I sent you a message about animals and the role of animals in Genesis, and I think the animals, they're representing the natural aspect in relationship to man, right? So like we have man's role, and it regresses to the animalistic, right? So we've been talking about the bull and the lion, right? So like the bull is like the apex of the domesticated, right? Like it's like the animal strength put into a yoke that can express man's will, right? By plowing fields, all of that stuff, right? And the lion is like the king of the animals, right? Like it's the apex predator, right? Like it's the imposition of nature that puts you in awe, right? Like it just like it takes you out of any culturalization and makes you naked, right? Like it just puts you without your clothes, and it's like, okay, can you beat this sucker or not, right? Like because it's now it's like you're gonna live or you're gonna die, like that's all that's left there. Um and wait, now I'm missing my connection. Can you remind me where I was starting from? Um, damn.
Just the animals in general, I think. Antichrist,
Yeah, but
margin.
what was your thing that you were talking about? Because I wanted to connect it to you.
Because like this idea of the totalizing, like the
Oh yeah,
total, the king of the world, and that
right,
stuff.
right. So oh yeah, so I was talking about the layer of man, right? And the animal's relationship to the layer of man, right? And so there's a totalization on the universal scale, right? Like which would be like the logos, right? Like the abstract, right? And then Christ is like the embodiment on the human scale, right? And reverting that human scale, right? Like doing Satan on the human level, right, as opposed to on the cosmic level. I think that's the Antichrist, right? So, like Christ is the lion and the lamb, right? And if you're only relating to the lamb, right, which is the thing that we're seeing now, you're perverting Christ because you're removing the lion aspect.
Yeah, it's like it's the human embodiment of the highest form of, or maybe the lowest form of identification against. You know, that it's like you can have, there's many like manifestations of little things that can reflect very well, but it's kind of like, okay, this is everything that rejects the name that it's been given, and then also chooses itself in relation to actually everything else, something like that.
Don't try to think about the cosmic on the human level. Just accept, right? There's a lamp like nature, right, which is the victim, right? It's the subject. It's the thing that's offered up, right? And then there's the lion nature, which is I get to impose my will. Like I'm unconstrained by anything because nothing can affect me, right? That kind of nature. And both of these nature need to be there in the divine, right? And if you focus on either, right, if you focus on the lion, you get the Nazis, right? Like, well, I've been doing a thing where I'm going through levels of identification, that you can identify with the nation as a Nazi, right? You can active identify with the community, then you get communism, right? You can identify with the individual, you get individualism, right? So what you're basically, you're trying to optimize for justice on the level that you identify with, right? And that's going to introduce a totalizing system, right? And the individualism is grasping onto onto the lamb, right? Like the lamb is the victim narrative, right? Because like what is the thing that's preventing you from being fulfilled as an individual? Well, it's the imposition of the external, right? You being offered up for something else. That's what's limiting your full expression, right? So the Antichrist manifests there, right? It's like, no, you're a lion. Like, stop acting as a lamb. Like sometimes you're a lamb, right? Like sometimes you're a sheep, like sometimes you're whatever. Like,
I mean, I think with the Antichrist, the point is that Christ transcends these categories we've talked about in the book about time and space and all that, and so the Antichrist also necessarily does, and then that's the
No.
reason why they look so similar.
No, that's the whole point. The identification of is greater than the identification against, even though it seems otherwise. That's what you're missing. The identification of is greater than the identification against, because the identification against is random chaos in all cases, right? You can say, I'm anti, and I'm against any random thing. Like I'm against killing animals and eating them. Like, you can say that, but you haven't identified what you are. And that makes you lesser automatically. You've already made yourself lesser. Now, you may seem greater in your mind because there's a lot more things in the identification against, right? Material things or ways of thinking about the world. But almost all of them are invalid. And and so what you've done is you've freed yourself from identity. And so everyone's freeing themselves from identity and then going, oh, I don't know what to do. I don't know who I am. And I don't know what reality is. It's like, because you freed yourself from identity by constantly identifying against, right? To identify against means you are rejecting all identity, right? Or maybe not all of it. It will be all of it. Right? You think you can just identify against one thing, but we live in an interconnected world, in an emanated creation that pre-existed us, that we were born into and therefore are connected to. If you reject part of that, you're actually going to end up rejecting the whole thing eventually over time. And so that's the Antichrist, is the anti-identification, right? And if you think of it that way, you realize, oh, the anti-identification, this is like nihilism, right? Nihilism to me is the silliest thing in the whole universe. And even the nihilists say, like, you stare into the abyss and it stares back. Well, if there's something in the abyss, it's not an abyss. Like, I don't like, because the abyss doesn't exist. Why? Because you were born into a creation, pre-existed you. It's really not that hard, but right. But people want so much to get out, to escape, to not be, to not have to conform to rules, that they reject identity. And in that way, you're rejecting all of creation eventually. And then you're lost. You're in a meaning crisis. You have an identity crisis. You can't. And then you want the things around you to form identities, right? And so you start making up terms and words and ways to understand the myriad of ways, because you're desperately trying to reconnect. And the next thing you know, you have 64 genders. And it's like, well, why don't you just go with the genders that we had?
So
and then you won't have this problem. If you don't create the problem, you also don't have to then solve the problem. So it's not like, oh, I now don't have to solve the problem. It's like, you also didn't spend the time, energy, and attention creating it. So actually, it's doubly better than you think, because you don't have to waste your time twice. You can waste your time 0 times. It's much better. It's much better. It's asymmetrical, in fact. Weird.
So I want to use Matthieu's picture here, right? Because I think it applies, right? So what is the identification against doing, right? So you're discerning a heavenly principle, right? Like correctly or not, like it doesn't even matter. You might even be correct, right? And then you're looking at the fact, right? Or you're looking at the expression of that principle, and you're saying it's unjust. And now you're like, I'm in between there, right? I'm on the place of science, and I get to correct the injustice because I can find the answers, right? So they just at the place of science add a social problem, right? Like this is just social science what they're doing, right? And so now we're going to correct this injustice, right? But what have they done, right? Like they have removed themselves, right, from it because they need to judge the thing, right? So they're not judging their place in the thing, right? They're judging the thing in and of itself, right? And then, right, like the thing in and of itself is embedded in 15 million other things, right? And now if you're serious about correcting this, right? And a lot of people are, because they feel like something is really wrong, right? Like you can just see it when they speak, right? Like it's like they're really passionate about it. We need to correct this wrong. Now you're going to have to reorganize all the things that are attached, right? So they're outside of your box. You're going to redefine all the things that are outside of the box in relation to the box, because they need to support the box and the justice in the box. Right? So now we can organize the whole world, right? And we need to get to net zero. Because else the box won't be correctly ordered. And it's no more difficult than that. And that's the problem of science, right? Like what they're literally doing is they're making an idol, right? So they're having the heavenly hierarchies, right? Like the kingdom of heaven, and like they're picking one rank. They're like, okay, let's have this organize everything. And you kind of have to, because if you're trying to order the world, right? You're trying to make a system, like you don't have another option.
Well, and that's trying to order the world instead of accepting the order that was already emanated upon you in the world. And science used to accept that order and look for it. And now it's trying to change that order.
And I said at the start of the book club, right? It's like this description is not enough. Like you got to give people something to participate, right? Because the answer, right, also to the Antichrist is not anything. It's just being the body of Christ is the answer to the Antichrist. There's no other answer.
Like, yeah, and I think that's part of Peterson's point about the crossing anthrax and Ebola is, you know, I mean, he doesn't understand that's part of the is-that-ought gap, or at least he doesn't express it that way, but it's also part of the participation, right? Like, if you could do that, what would your participation become, right? Or what options for participation have you introduced into the world? Oh, there's no positive participation that can come from that, from the standpoint of being is good, which is the only valid axiomatic assumption, by the way. Then why would you even pursue that? Like, why even? Because maybe we have free will and we can make that happen, but it seems counterproductive somehow by definition. So why would you? They go, why would you pursue God if he's going to burn your face off? Like, it's the same sort of stupidity.
Why would you use meta? It's gonna make your brain go to mush.
Well, to be fair, Mature is using it correctly, at least, unlike almost everybody else who's uttering the term or typing it out or whatever.
Are you saying that he meta all the meta users?
Yes.
Okay. The final chapter. Oh, he finally went to the beginning at the end. That was well done. Middle out or backward thinking or yeah, I didn't have anything to say about this.
Yeah, well, I think the end chapter just gives you permission, if you will, to use the symbols and the ways of relating those symbols, the patterns that he's given you, to continue your journey through the rest of the Bible, using these new tools that you've been hopefully upgraded with, like some sort of bizarre cyborg whose brain has been implanted with upgraded systems, or to quote the beginning of the Matrix 2, upgrades. It's like, aha. Don't get me started. So yeah, so I mean, it's just showing you, here's the basics again. Look at how many combinations you can make with just this, and that's not all of the things he went over in the book by any means, right? And he's just giving you permission to go ahead and allow yourself to employ these tools throughout the rest of the Bible, to understand the Bible in a more poetically informative way, if you will, borrowing from our knowledge engine model, which you can check out on the Navigating Patterns channel. And that is, that level of engagement, I think, is what he's sort of inviting you into. And that I mean, I think it's a nice cap, right? Because he's also saying at the same time, I'm fulfilling my promise to give you these tools and show you how to use them, and now you can go and do that.
Be fruitful and multiply. So I was just thinking, right? We had our 4 categories at the knowledge engine, right? Like the fluid. It's just like I don't know. That sounds awful lot like these. Maybe something to think about at some point. Yeah, I'm still stuck with this. Man is relating to animals, right? Like that's the thing that's different in Genesis 1, right? Like you have the universe being created as such with the plants and the trees, and you have a second phase where the animals are introduced, and that's the layer, well, upon which life happens, right? So there's these things, right, that we interact with, that have a reality to us, that need to be named in relationship to us, right? Like I think actually they only get to have their proper name in relationship to man. Like they don't have a proper name in relationship to God, because or to God the Father then, right? Because they have a proper name in relationship to Jesus. But they don't have a proper name in relationship to the universal layer, because that's not where they participate, right? And so we kind of have to look at that layer, right? And like I already said, right, like we get to reduce these things to categories, right? Like not relevant, not interesting, not right, like danger, useful, right, valuable. Like all of these things, they precede the more complex scientific looking at their exact fitting in, right? Like because we're not discerning the fitting in when we're describing a category. We're just seeing their potential, right? Like we're seeing their purpose or something fitting in our purpose. And that's where most cognition should be. That I guess that's the thing, that because when we try to work backwards, right? It's like, oh look, the universe was created so many thousand billions years ago. It's like, okay, so now I know this fact, right? Like, let's just assume this is a truth. It's like, how does this participate in my life? Like, now I'm gonna have to find a meaning to this. It's like, how do I do that? Like, that's impossible, right? So like when you start, um if you peek behind the veil, right, or you see your father naked, and then have to reorder things, you're screwed. Um, so let's just not do an integration, but let's do a reflection on the wholeness of the book club. As like, okay, like let's just try to bring back, okay, who was I when I came in, and what changed, um, and see like the fruits, and also have some appreciation for what happened. Well, who wants to start? Look into the face of God and burn. Okay.
I'm happy to start. It's been a very fruitful year for me. In many ways. I've definitely felt a lot of lack in myself through the book club. And having that reflected back on me is good, I would say. if I can integrate that properly, and improve myself in some ways. But yeah, I mean, the patterns, the tools Matthieu gives us have been very useful for me. Even though I did read this book before the book club, a couple of years before, I think. But going through it and like with the group and hearing all of your stuff and pushback and has been a lot more helpful than I even imagined it could be, because I've gained a lot, that I didn't get. So I gained so much more through the book club than I got reading about myself. And another thing that's also been valuable is just the common language, I think, that has been gained with all of you guys. That's also something that I don't quite see exactly, but I kind of know it's there. That's been great as well. Yeah. Thank you all.
I've enjoyed going through this. Yeah, definitely learned a bit or a lot about the symbolic tool set, I guess. And it's helpful to see that there's all these, one-to-many relationships, and that, to like mediating them properly doesn't involve like picking them all apart. You can just do things and not, try to analyze all of them and stuff. So even if I realize I tend to put myself on the wrong side of that, but a lot, but you can see the path forward to being a little bit better, at least.
I think as we've been going through this, I mean, it's been a lot of fun. I've been enjoying it so much. I'm happy to see everything get sealed off and completed, right? But to Mark's point at the beginning, like I will miss this to some extent, but I think this is also going to inform a lot of future interactions and projects and things like that. I think I would definitely echo what you said, Gustavs, about just being able to do this as a community has been extremely valuable. I had gone through the book maybe twice before and never, kind of was able to reach the same sort of understanding as within the group. And I think there's been I've found a lot of utility in especially kind of reading this alongside the Bible and then going, and now that we've kind of reached the end of it and had all of our insights, now starting a new read through and seeing, oh my goodness, there's so much stuff that you can glean from that, but not just for the sake of information, but to Mark's earlier point about finding the things that apply to you and your state and then participating in that has been unbelievably useful. And I think to a point that he made yesterday in the live stream, saying about if you have intimacy and then you were aiming for virtue or participation, that the meaning comes for free. And I think especially with the encouragement of doing this as a group and it being said explicitly, but also kind of demonstrated implicitly, that participation, I would probably, you know what, I could say confidently that there is nothing I could say that is without meaning from my perspective. Like there's, by allowing this lens to inform my reading, which then informs my participation, I think it would be unfair if I were to ever say that anything no longer has meaning. So that's been extremely valuable, and it was completely free. So there's to no credit of myself, it was very, very fun, and I highly recommend that people engage with the book club if you've shown up late. and definitely kind of carry this on into your own reading, and especially into practice, the things that you can glean that are relevant.
Yeah, I think with all these sorts of group activities, the big thing that you gain is that whole that is greater than the sum of the parts. And so, yeah, I mean, I had read all but the last, I don't know, 6, 7 chapters by myself, and I kind of got bored. So I'm like, this is all obvious. But then seeing how other people are seeing the book and interacting with their questions and their viewpoints, and understanding the richness and fullness of the ability of other people's perspectives to add to my own was a really enriching experience, as it always is. I mean, the Texas Wisdom Community Book Club that we did was the same. But glad I didn't have to read Plato's Republic by myself. That would have been terrible. And so just interacting with other people's perspectives while you're actually looking at the same text allows you to sort of get an appreciation for the difference between what the text says and what an interpretation is, right? Because each perspective could have a different interpretation, but the text hasn't changed. And so it is that sort of invariant signal that people get a sense for. And I think beyond sort of the book and the understanding of the book, being in community in a book club and having it structured, we'll say in this way, which was informed by a lot of previous work, right? Thank you to Dr. Verveke. That was an enrichment in and of itself that was worth all the time spent. Because this is a big commitment. Like 40 of these is a huge commitment. It's a lot of time after the book club. I was talking about the book club in some cases, and my level of participation was based on basically Manuel's desire to do the book club. And so I want to thank him for putting in all the effort and organization and everything else, because it's very hard to organize anything, and especially organize people, because people suck. They're terrible. And we started out with a different crew to some extent, which is fine. Like, there's nothing wrong with that. And I hope everybody gets to engage at whatever level you can, and get something out of it, even if you're not able to interact sort of live. I mean, it's a lesser form of interaction, maybe, but I think that's okay. Like, I think because it's very overwhelming, right? Even just talking to me over Twitter can be very overwhelming for people, and right, not to mention Manuel, who's Dutch. So there you go. And so whatever your method and mode of engagement, we'll say after the fact, because this will be our last one on this book, that's for sure. Take something away from it and engage with the whole thing. Don't skip around. There is a progression. It's not a deliberate progression, but like, there's a progression as the result of time. There's a progression as a result of the progression of the book. There's a progression as the result of the increased understanding over time, right? And take the time to really take the book club seriously. And look, if we have a lot of comments and a lot of people like after fact, like, oh, we want you to do book club on X or Y, maybe somebody will arrange that. For my part, I'm gonna try to do 12 Rules for Life, a pragmatic approach, in 6 weeks. So it'll be 2 chapters a week, and we'll see what comes of that. I'm not going to be able to run as tight a ship as Manuel does. So I want to thank him for all his efforts.
Yeah, I kind of, yeah. I want to do a reflection on the efforts, but I described the book club today to someone, and I said, like, in the book club, the things that we were reading in the book came out. So like we did have like a participatory expression of what we were engaging in. Like, that was kind of what I was aiming for. And like I since you guys started talking about me, I got reminded of some of my tribulation. It's like I was just like, man, like how am I gonna like set this straight? Right? like how am I gonna get this to work? Right? Because like I I want something for you guys, and like in some sense, I let a lot of that stuff go, because like I just knew that I couldn't make it happen. Um, but like I I'm trying to communicate something, right? And that is in the communion, right? Like in the being together, in the participation in a certain manner, right? And like the personal development uh, that is with that, and the structure of the intentions, right? Like the directing of the conversation, is also supposed to help with that. But like at the start, I definitely didn't know what was going to happen. Like I knew what it was important, right? Like I had criticisms on the book, like some on a level of I don't know, technicalities, but also on a level of, okay, like what are you doing, right? Like how's this good? And um, so on a more personal level, like I still don't have a good response to that, saying like, okay, like it should be this way. Um, like I kind of know what's missing, but not how to do it. That kind of thing. But well, we got it, or at least I got it out of it anyway, right? Like I got to see it like form like an egg inside of me, right? And like now I have this egg and I need to hatch it somehow. Which is interesting to see yourself go through that, right? And then in the outside world, right? Like I think the book helped with, like I was talking about with the animals, right? Like putting things in their place. Um, and that allows me to know how to respond appropriately. Um, I also get to see things in other people, right? It's like, oh, you're trying to do this, right? And now you're being frustrated in that or something, right? And then you can place them in these archetypal relationships, right? And you can help them, and you can help them not so much in like, oh, look, I'm gonna give you tools. Like, no, like I'm gonna give you the foundation stone, right? Like I'm gonna give you the stone that you can stand upon, and then lift it up yourself, because like that's eventually where we need to end up, right? And the other thing is like I've been starting to see these patterns beyond the patterns that were in the book, right? In the Bible, and like I've been trying to bring them into the book club, but I think it's important to, I don't know, like there's a sensitivity in the sense of observing, but there's also a way of being or something, that is required to be receptive. And so like when you start getting to know that part, it's like, okay, like I guess I'm going to use the stupid word flow, right? Like I'm in the flow, right? Like I'm following a true line that is real versus I'm trying to get something out of the text. um, that that is the thing that opens doors, right? Like that's the thing that opens the shutters of your eyes, like. um and I think ultimately, right, it's something like that you want to communicate, right? Like you want to have the trust, like that's a word that I wanted to bring in earlier, right? Like you want to trust on the system so that you don't have to double check 15 things, right? And I like, Christopher said, like you don't need to know all of it to do that. Like that's no, you just need to know that it's there and how to access it, right? And then what will be revealed, right? Because that's the thing that's necessary to be revealed. Like that's the path, to that. But yeah, like I also was experimenting with this book club format, right? And just seeing like what can people handle and what can't they handle, right? It's just like, for me it's so frustrating. It's like here, like like I got the pearl, like don't be a swine please, right? But like it's in our nature to be swine somehow, sometimes. So yeah, I'll leave it with that. Maybe we can get some reflections. I think I see RJ said some stuff.
Yeah, if
Yeah,
anybody has any suggestions, leave them in the comments on one of the channels, because we're streaming to like 3 YouTube channels and
yeah,
ads and all kinds of places.
and like I want to do another book club, although I want to have a break for a while, but um like but I want to have it be intentional, not not intentional in the sense of, oh look, Matthieu wrote a cool book, because that's kind of what it was, right? And we're like, oh, it's important as well, right? Like, no, it's like, we all go into this wanting to get something out of it, right? And we all work towards it. Like that would be the next level for me.
Yeah, well, Matthieu's got a new book coming, so that's
Yeah, maybe.
forward to that, maybe or not.
You can
So,
keep
yeah.
dreaming about that.
Thanks. No, there was an announcement. So apparently someone read it even. So it's done.
No, it's a book about dreams. That was a fun bit.
We'll see. Well, it is a dreamy book. So yeah, thanks everybody for participating and questions and stuff in the comments. On either navigating patterns or Gothic orientation, or those are the 2 best places to put comments. Those are the places that Manuel and I can check easily, and we'll do our best to answer them. And
yeah, and we're on Discord hanging out. So talking is better than writing. And yeah, we're on the 3 YouTube channels. So like check out Mark's channel. He's doing all of his weekly live streams, and he's doing explanatory videos around things that have been based upon the works that we did on Vervaeke's Discord servers, and his life as well, obviously. I do want to do some projects, but I'm like I got myself full with this, which is like, I need to get my stuff together and start producing things. But I have some ideas of where I'm going. I think the first steps that I want to do is write more on Substack, and I want to produce like a body of work, and then do something with that body, right? Like give it into a digestible format. Because I think if you want to write a book, like Matthieu said, he was like 10 years or something, he was ruminating on this stuff. So yeah, like it's not easy. Anybody last words? Well then, goodbye, and I hope to talk to you.